Live. Got that. First in our webinar series, conversations with seed producers, specifically looking at perennial seed and some of the producers that we're going to be working with to help distribute our AMP grant and get more perennial seed on the ground. I've got here in the room, the webinar room, I've got Joey and Julia from the Native Seed Group. I'm assuming you can hear me, Julia and Joey, and just need you to come up on stage with me. I think that's the bottom right icon if you're looking at your screen. Yeah, you can hear me. Good. So hit the go on stage button. Come on up so you can chat. Then we'll get into this. I think the icon is at the bottom of your screen where you've got the microphone and the video, and there's going to be an icon that says go on stage. Yes. Well, here comes Amy.
Oh, did they find it?
No, Julia messaged, where is it?
Oh, I just want to make sure you need to give the platform permission to your microphone and camera, because I was trying to invite you on stage and it's grayed out. And I think it's because there's no limitation on who we can invite on stage unless you haven't.
So is that settings? Hit the little gear button for settings.
Yes, it should be. You should be able to do it there or in your browser. Okay, great.
It's happening.
How about now?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, can you see me?
There you are.
Okay,
hi, Julia.
Hello.
Yeah, let's drag Joey up here.
Yeah, well, let's see. I see Joey.
Here he comes. He doesn't get a pass. There he is. Oh, I like that setting. Out there in the pasture with your cattle.
Are those yours, Joey? I know you got cattle.
Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Joey.
You're muted now, Joey.
You still got to unmute yourself.
Joey, find your microphone there so you can get you unmuted.
There we go.
Here he is.
There we go.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's our
those are
there. I had a plain white wall behind me, so I better dress up a little bit. So
absolutely. Well, those are your cattle. That's neat. These are not my vines behind me. Unfortunately, Jackson family has those vines. So
okay, yeah, this is outside of Oakdale, this pasture here. So
nice. What's that? A late winter, early spring picture when things are lush and green still?
Yeah, spring. I think it was. Yeah, probably January or so, February.
Okay. All right. Yeah, nice and wet. So yeah, so this is the first of our perennial seed discussions with suppliers. It's not, I'd said it's a webinar, but it's much more casual conversation than it is, presentation and lecture. Here at Oakville Bluegrass, we've got this grant that helps us achieve our mission, which is helping growers primarily in the vineyard and orchard space establish perennial cover with the goals of driving soil health. And of course, soil health could mean so many different things, but from an economics perspective, we're trying to help growers tap into and participate in carbon markets. So driving soil carbon, but that means also doing things that help infiltration and water management, help the microbiome in the soil, reduce overall inputs. Ultimately, hopefully also you see the benefits of this work, improving the nutrient value of the crops that they're growing. And so our grant enables us to help fund the planting of conservation cover, also known as perennial cover, also known as permanent cover, anything that's under the basket of NRCS 327. Pollinators fit into that. And I'm new to the organization since about last November. And what I'm finding as I talk to growers is they've kind of got their standard, if they're already doing cover crops, they've got their standard annual mix that they order. And it creates a ton of biomass, and they can see it. Like they can see it doing this thing on the ground, and that biomass is often the indicator that something's working for them. And then those that have made the switch or have attempted to make the switch to perennials, they don't get all the same indicators of this giant visual biomass that grows. And so there's confusion about like what success looks like, what should I be planting, how to, and our goal is to get growers off of that annual treadmill, so they can have fewer passes through the vineyard, through the orchard, and put seed on the ground that's going to help them achieve their goals, but also stay within the guardrails of what they're trying to do. Avoid biomass. They want summer dormancy. They want more wildflowers. These things. And so I'm excited to talk to the two of you, because here in California, you're probably some of the best informed people about this topic when it comes to establishment of perennials or natives in cropping systems. And I'd like you to share. When I go to your LinkedIn or your websites, I see Native Seed Group, I see Pacific Coast Seed, I see Hedgerow Farms, I see multiple names. So I'd love you to introduce yourselves, and then a little bit about just the family of companies and businesses that you represent, and kind of what your superpowers are in that. And then we'll get into some more specific questions about, actually getting seed on the ground and making it work.
Well, thank you. I do have a couple of slides. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's great. Absolutely.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I figured I'd show you guys a couple pictures.
I welcome that.
And then Joe, I'm going to sort of do this introduction and then step it back and let Joey kind of take it from here.
Okay.
Can you see my whole PowerPoint or just the slide?
I see the whole thing,
including like the menu bar.
I see the three on the left. Yeah, I see the whole thing.
All right. We'll do play from current slide. Let's see if this works better. How about that?
Yep, that's the intro slide. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Cool.
So anyway, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Julia Michaels. I'm a restoration ecologist, and I work for the Native Seed Group, which includes Pacific Coast Seed, and I work very closely with Joey. Joey, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so Joey Gonsalves, actually newer to Pacific Coast Seed, started in December, handle ag sales, business development. Been in the industry for over 26 years with Farm Co-op for most of that, doing seed, feed, as well as marketing, customer relations. So a little bit of everything there. And of course, we did a lot of field seed, but we did, and we're growing a lot in cover crop and pasture, kind of became a specialty of ours. My family, we also raise almonds and walnuts, so I kind of come in, as well as cattle. And then so I kind of come from a farmer perspective on a lot of things and how it's going to work in a practical sense as well. So I think that's what's great about our company, is we can combine a lot of different, backgrounds and experiences to really get a good technical advice to farmers.
That's a really good point. Joey and I come from really different backgrounds, right? I'm an ecologist. I focus mostly on native species, wildland collections, and restoration. But there's so much intersection between what people who are doing this sort of regenerative ag work are thinking about, and what we're thinking about in our wildlands. And so our inventory is really diverse and has everything from traditional agricultural products to wild species you can only get from going out and collecting them and growing them at the farm. Let's see. So the Native Seed Group, like you mentioned, is a parent company that has several different regionally focused seed companies across the Western U.S. And all in all, we end up producing a lot of seed for a lot of different types of projects. Everything from, as Joey mentioned, ag, forage products, a lot of almond pollinator mixes, everything to specialty restoration mixes, erosion control mixes for roadsides and reclamation. We really have, quite a bit of inventory. So in addition to just having, large volumes, we have thousands of species available. So here's sort of a map of our companies and where they all fit in. There's just a handful that are missing from this map, but the big players I'd say are Pacific Coast Seed and Tracy, Granite Seed, which is in the Intermountain West in Denver and Salt Lake City, and then we have Star Seed in Kansas and Nebraska. And the S&S Seeds and Hedgerow Farms are both California companies, and they're both the farms that actually produce the seed that Pacific Coast Seed sells. So we're production brands. Mm-hmm. Our farms are gorgeous to come visit. If you're ever in the Winters area, please stop by and say hello. We grow perennial grasses, annual wildflowers, perennial wildflowers, and we have many alternating fields, which helps us with weed control. So this is a cool view of a perennial grass on one side and then right next to an annual lupin. We do a lot of seed cleaning, both for ourselves and also custom seed cleaning. So that's something your producers should know about. We have, state-of-the-art equipment that's available both in Northern and Southern California. And we do both internal inventory cleaning and contract cleaning. And then we also have a 20,000 square foot warehouse in Tracy where we do all of our shipping and receiving. And we've got, experienced staff that have been doing that for many decades to make sure that, all orders go out quickly and correctly. And we really excel in customer service in that area. So projects that I've worked on, and I'm sure Joey's worked on many more, and he'll tell you all about them. I really enjoy doing mixes for almond orchards and vineyards that are a mix of native and non-native species. So here's a mix that has some traditional clovers and then also some native perennial grasses coming in, and then some annual native lupin coming in. This was a really fun project. We actually drone seeded this, which is a whole other can of worms that I can get into. When you talk about establishing, low maintenance, long-term cover, it actually kind of reminds me a lot of some of the solar mixes that we've come up with that are meant to be really low maintenance, either go dormant in the summer or stay really, easy to manage and don't require a lot of irrigation. So that's something we can talk about as sort of, the overlap between the perennial cover we established for solar and what your growers might be interested in. Just some other projects I've done. Poppies are a really lovely semi-perennial species. They're more of a biennial species, but they established for a long time. And this was just a field that we did last spring. That's all I have. I just wanted to very quickly kind of give you guys an overview of who we are, where we fit into this whole thing. And if I can figure out how to get back, I will stop sharing and let you
It sounds
take
like
over.
you have there's a lot of resources there.
Yes.
Given the multiple regions and then the multiple production farms that you've got here in California. Sounds like there's a lot of capabilities there.
Definitely. I think that's one of the most interesting parts about having this sort of regional companies backed by a national brand. We're able to sort of really dig down and focus on our areas of expertise, but then we're able to draw upon the resources of this much larger force. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The solar mixes is interesting because the first thing that comes to mind there that I think of is kind of lower profile vegetation. And obviously you mentioned low maintenance, low water needs. You don't have to irrigate your solar farm in the summer. And you don't want to have to get in there with equipment and seed it every year probably either once it's established, once you've got the everything there. And so I think you're right. There may be some overlap there. And the vegetation height thought that comes to mind there resonates with one of the growers that we saw at Burroughs Family Farms Regenerative Tree Nut Day, and his goal was he basically said roots over shoots. He wants the root mass and the root diversity and root activity, but he doesn't want to have to feel like he should be out there with a baling machine to get rid of all the forage, all the biomass. He's not biomass focused. And so and I think we're going to hear that a lot especially from the almond growers, that they want the perennial vegetation, but they want the cover crop, but they don't want as much biomass. What are some of the go-tos that you think of when somebody has that as one of the guardrails for what they're going to do? Is they want that vegetation to get out of the way and not be a barrier to their practices?
Well, one thing to keep in mind, I mean, we can do custom blends of anything, so kind of anybody's heart's desire we can do. So that is what makes us unique. We've got 4 different blenders here in Tracy, so we can do a lot of different things. Because some of our mixes, I mean, you're going to get, depending on the species, 2-3 foot tall. So if those aren't options for something you want to work with that much, there are some low profile ones. We have a low profile beneficial habitat mix that has a lot of different clovers, some flowers, a little bit of grasses in there as well, but low growing grasses like creeper and red fescue, things like that. So those are our options as well, that are low growing. Plus, you get the habitat for bees, butterflies, things like that as well. So pretty important. So that would probably fit on the low profile side. Even an almond pollinator mix we have along those similar lines, more of a flower based kind of product that can attract some bees and hopefully develop some habitat there. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Julia,
like
you mentioned
a white clover is perennial.
yes.
Something like that is really not a lot of biomass, but would be and would stay really low to the ground, provide pollinator habitat. That comes to mind. It's not native, but it's a good one. Yeah.
You mentioned you had a comment about that almond orchard that you had the picture of with the multi-species mix. What you commented on it. What made that unique? Was there some unique challenges that came with that, or what was it about that slide and that setting that was noteworthy for you?
Well, what I thought was really interesting about that one, right, is everybody kind of lives in their own world. So, I was convincing the almond farmer to sneak some natives into this mix that he isn't used to doing. And then I was convincing the Resource Conservation District that was funding it I can't remember what, I was convincing somebody else who was involved in it that it was okay for it not to be on 100% native mix, right? So it's like, nobody was like familiar with this combination of species. And so that was what was really interesting to me, was sort of that's when the light bulb went off that, what I do and what Joey does have a lot in common. And that's really important for keeping costs down, right? If people come to us sometimes and look for 100% native cover crop mixes, and that's going to be prohibitively expensive in most cases. So to me, it's about identifying which species are beneficial and actually playing a role that a non-native can't, and leaning in on those, and then compromising in some other areas. And a lot of these traditional species are the best for the job. So I think that's why that one project came to mind for me.
Yeah, I think
with some of those native species, they can be very expensive. I've seen some native wildflowers, $150 a pound or something like that. Like they can be incredibly expensive, probably because they're being harvested by hand out in the field, not necessarily at a farm. But is it fair to say that because they're natives, if they're just a tiny fraction of the mix on day one, that if they do get some germination and some establishment in that first year, that 5 years later they can make up more of that cover as the years go on, because they have that competitive advantage.
Yes, depending on the species, they can persist and reseed. Some of our native bromes are really competitive and do well from like the perennial grass side. I know this is a conversation about perennials in particular, but we did a project at the Plant Materials Center in Lockford where we just did it was an orchard mix for sheep grazing, and it was only 1.5% native Phacelia. And now I went back and visited. It's 3 years later, and it's still maybe closer to 2%. So it's held that it's held its ground, which is impressive given all the weed pressure and all the aggressive non-natives it is growing with. So
yeah, with perennials, if somebody has been using kind of the generic soil builder mix that is an annual focus, and they're making a switch to perennials, to a perennial mix. And you mentioned the idea of having some annuals in a perennial mix, because I think that our goal with the growers that are doing this is that they're not terminating. They're going to let it go to seed. We get into summer, they're starting to clip it and mow it down, to get it out of the way. But in terms of the growing season, it's probably going to seed if it's an annual. So, but it's going to be a different type of seed mix.
Sure.
What's that?
Well, a lot of those will stay year after year, those annuals that will reseed themselves and come back. A lot of our area pasture mixes, which are basically perennial pastures, they'll have annual rye in it, things like that, because they will continue to reseed, and they're put in there to get some maybe off-season growth. They will grow better sometime in the winter versus summer, so you get more of a steady growth. And they're quick to grow and establish. If there is some erosion issues or anything like that, it does help there. And they're tough. So there's some advantages that they are put in to it.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Does a perennial mix usually present differently in the first year or two? Like, is it going to look different than what they're used to? Because I think that visual presentation, what's happening in the orchard often is tells the grower, okay, it's working. But if the visual presentation is different, they might not know it's working. So how do you set expectations for what to plan on seeing in their orchard, in their middles, if they've changed up from what they've been doing, typical soil builder mix to a perennial mix with some natives? What's going to happen from an expectations management perspective, so they know what to expect and know what to look for in terms of success?
I think initially I'll start. I think the growth rate is going to be a little different. They're going to be established a little bit slower. It's going to be finer bladed grasses and things versus, some of the typical annual ones you're going to have some sort of small grain, which is rapid, oats, wheat, triticale, something like that. It's going to really grow rapidly and expand. Or you've got peas, beans, vetch, those kind of things that kind of jump out and really grow. Mustard, which can get big. It's a tiny seed, but it makes a pretty big plant. And that's going to be different when you look at an annual versus a perennial. I know we used to do at the co-op, we did some research trials, and of course we did a lot of corn, alfalfa, and small grains, but we did some covered crop also and some blends. But then we did the individual components so farmers could look at it and see it. And you look, it's like, I think this is not growing. I go over and look at the map, like, oh, that's because it's a perennial. It's growing. It does it at a slower rate. The others are like, I'm an annual. I've got to get going and get through production as quick as I can. So, more to that.
Yeah. That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, I use the I use the sprinter versus like, the annuals are in a sprint to reproduce. They're in a sprint to get vegetative really fast. They're in a sprint to go reproductive, produce seed, and then their life cycle is over. Whereas the perennials they're in for the long, like they're hiking the PCT. They're just getting started. They're going to cruise. They're going to put roots down. And really what I think, maybe is what's happening with the perennial. Are they focused on roots more? Like is the vegetative growth above ground less because their energy is just going elsewhere?
In general, I'd say that is
Okay.
the case. I would add that the maintenance or sort of weed management is different when you're planting perennials. I think often people get shy about like mowing in the first couple of years of establishment. And really, once a perennial has been established, you can mow it pretty. I mean, you don't have to, but if you can shift the balance easily between perennials and annuals, or the desired versus undesired species by mowing. And that's a really nice thing. So maybe it might take a little bit of extra maintenance or an extra keeping an eye on the species in the first year or two, but then you're really free to manage the way that you'd like to. Versus, if you're trying to get something to reseed, you can't mow it until it's made the seed, and then it's very limiting in your ability to work with it.
So are you saying that mowing or clipping to some height ultimately favors the perennials? And is that a tool that they should plan on using in those first couple of years to keep what you might consider the weeds? If the weeds are just the annuals that they don't want, they want to keep those down and favor the perennials. Does clipping or mowing a couple times each season favor those perennials having a successful first and second year?
That's my experience with the species that I work with. Joey, what is your experience with the agricultural perennials?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, to try to limit weed competition is always important in any type of perennial you're establishing. So make it maybe before you plant, make sure you kill everything that's there ahead of time. To, if you can, work it up, spray it just to get as much clean as you can. I mean, that's way like starting an alfalfa field. It's going to be there for a few years, and getting the weeds under control as much as you can, and then getting the alfalfa planted and trying to keep it as clean as possible helps that stand life. And it's no different with the perennial cover crop or pasture or whatever that somebody's growing. That if you get it clean and established well, and try to where they can minimize the weeds early, and then have them where they choke out the rest of the weeds once they get established. That's critical.
Yeah.
And setting the mower height is important. So
what's best there?
Like 2 or 3 inches minimum, I'd say.
You don't want to scalp it too much.
Don't go lower than that. Like bring the mower up some.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. So bring the mower up. I mean, some places I know are more like 4 or 5 inches. But that's a way to sort of, avoid, because if the perennials are still establishing, you don't want to mow them all the way down to the ground.
Right.
It helps with the regrowth, keeping it quick and strong. You cut it, really short. It's going to take a bit to get going again. So if you have it a little bit longer, you'll be able to do that, and again continue to outcompete weeds and everything as well.
Okay, that makes sense, because I think that resonates with what we've been told in some other conversations where the annuals, they're bolting, they want to get up tall and get that vegetative mass built up, and so they are they're going to race, and so knocking them down even just a little bit, getting them like whatever the height of the perennials is. If the perennials at 4 inches, mow to 4 inches to kind of knock off the tops of the annuals or the weeds that you don't want. Give the perennials their opportunity to compete. So there's a couple questions in the chat here. I have a couple things I want to come back to, but let's touch on these. One of them is the use of inoculants in a multi-species mix. And what's your experience there? What are your thoughts there when a grower says, "Hey, should I put some inoculants into this seed mix to help it get started and take off?" What's been your experience, and what do you recommend, or when do you recommend that?
For legumes, an inoculant is nice to have if you can do it. We put inoculants in. Sorry about that. We put inoculants in mixes before for growers. It's not real common. We usually sell the things separate and they put it in, but because then you also are putting it on the grasses as well, or whatever other species you have in there. So that is a challenge. I understand probably that's the question, is how do you deal with the stuff that doesn't really need it? Are you overdoing it? Some of the clovers that we have, are coated, and they're actually inoculated through some coating. So there's that as well. So most you might be okay with that. The coating will have some benefits, and you won't have to add additional. But if somebody wanted to, it's an option.
Okay.
And we carry an interesting mycorrhizal inoculant at it's called AM 120. It's a very ecologically formulated based formula. It's meant for things like erosion control, like a slow release, sort of steady inoculant that is actually, I believe it's made in Europe. Is that right, Joey?
I think so. I gotta look on the back.
Where they have really, intense standards. It can be used in row crops as well. It's mostly used in slope stabilization, though. That is what we tend to spec on our, Caltrans if they need some inoculant, things like that.
And the goal of the inoculant, just to pull back a little bit higher up, pull it up to 30,000 feet. When we say inoculants, usually we're talking about microbial inoculants that are then going to help the seeds, help get that microbiome alive and thriving around the seed, so that the seed can be more successful once it's germinated. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, it's extending the root systems, basically their ability to access water, nutrients, etc. Yeah.
I think, Joey, when you mentioned that not a lot of growers do it, I'm wondering if that's because they're seeding annually. They're throwing this seed mix in annually. It's got a short term, it's a short cycle. Yeah. There's multiple species in that mix. Whatever comes up this year is what comes up, and we'll do it again next year, and it might be different. And so I'm wondering if when we come to, hey, this is a very intentionally chosen, curated mix of perennials and annuals that we want to be there. We want it there for 15 years. We want it successful one time. Does that raise the bar in terms of how important or how helpful inoculants might be?
I think certainly would. Yeah, that they'll be, just for greater success, getting those seedlings off to as strong a start as they can again, so they just can take off and establish root system, help choke out other weeds. I think, in this situation, it probably would help more, for sure. Okay. I'd say some of them already have them in there, but this product is pretty good. You hadn't seen it till I started working here and looking at it. It's pretty interesting. What it does.
Okay,
it's
great
product. It looks so messy and dirty, like a lot of others here. So.
Super. So a couple more questions. One of the comments was about spreading or rhizomatous species and that, how can mowing be done pretty much any time on those? But then a follow up on that is, the orchard floor, a clean orchard floor in almond harvest and walnuts is a factor that a lot of our growers are going to be thinking about. So they're going to be thinking about, does this perennial species get out of the way? Does this permanent cover crop that I'm putting in, when we say permanent, it doesn't mean it's there 365 days of the year above ground and green. It means it's you don't have to reseed it. It's going to come back on its own. And so what are some of the, spreading, one of my concerns is if I'm just trying to keep this cover crop in the middles and not on my tree or my vine rows and berms, spreading I might be scared because I'm going to lose control of it. And then there's also the orchard floor being cleaned. So when a grower comes to you and says, here's my guardrails again, I don't want to spread. I want to get out of the way. I want a clean orchard in August. By September 1, I want a clean floor. How does that factor into your decision-making and your seed selection for them?
It's something that Julie and I've talked about, as we've talked about perennial, Kurt, is how will they work in an orchard situation when, you do want to get it cut down. Now I remember, younger, and even not too many, it was, guys would float an orchard. They'd kill everything. Some would even work it before and float it and get completely smooth dirt to have before harvest. I don't see that as much anymore. We got to get it mowed down really tight, but machinery, sweepers, pickup machines are probably better than they have been in the past. So I don't see as many guys dragging, floaters through there to really just make it to bare dirt anymore. I'm sure there's a couple that we can make it work more. So, if you picture what's going to happen, you're going to mow it down pretty tight. It's a good established, been growing, all season. So it should be well established. Because even I think back in a pasture situation, sometimes you get sheep or something, they're going to chew it down to the ground, but the root system's still there and they'll come back. So we can get it done tight. And then, you picture you've got a sweeper coming through. What's a sweeper doing? It's blowing all that stuff that's underneath the tree, the plants, the leaves there, and blowing it back to the middle. So that might stop a little bit of the spread of things. And then, you're picking it up and getting it out. In fact, afterwards, a lot of times you have to maybe do something to kind of spread out, with the pickup machine, the leaves and the dirt and stuff that got piled up the middle to keep things level and also keep it off the cover crop. So you kind of may do something to kind of pull the blood, move that around. But I think nowadays it is a challenge, and it's something we want to have species that aren't, super grabby, that when they are mowed down, they're not real stemmy and thick at the base. So something that's a little bit softer that nuts can blow through. And I think a lot of crops we have can. A lot of the grass, a lot of the clovers are soft enough with blowers going to be able to move most things through. So I think it's manageable, that we can do.
Okay. You mentioned floating the floor, and when we've talked to some growers about having perennials and having roots, living roots in the ground, even though there's no vegetation above ground in August, there's still roots that are alive, ready for that next cool season and some moisture, and they're there in the ground. And so we've started to think about, like, when we talk to them about how they do their floor maintenance and they float the orchard, don't blade it. Don't blade it exactly. a quarter inch deep. Like, you're not blading it like a road. It's being bladed to make it, scraping it, like truly float it, get a quarter inch above the soil, not below the soil surface, to smooth that out. And then having talked to some growers that are doing this, that still works. Like, they can still do that. They can still have a successful harvest. It just might be different than they've done in the past, or how it looked when they were doing it 10 years ago. So, but as you guys know, practice changes are hard. Like, you only get so many seasons And anytime you change a practice, it feels a little experimental and you feel like there's some risk. And so having those communications and setting expectations up front is key.
Yeah.
So we're going to, we've got our members and we've got growers that are participating in the carbon program, and they're participating in the AMP grant that we've got, and they're tapping into these funds. One of the pledges that we have to the growers is that we're going to help do some of the legwork. We interface with the USDA on their behalf, so they don't have to do that. I know some growers, that's their least favorite thing to do, is fill out government forms. And so we help them with that. But we also want to help them, source the seeds. And some of our growers have agronomists that are making recommendations already, and that's great. But others, this is new territory. And so like I said, we're going to say, well, what are your goals? And what do you want to avoid? Like, what are the guardrails? Like, what are the tripwires that you want to avoid? Because if you do something wrong, sometimes doing something wrong is much more impactful than doing the other things right. So we want to avoid doing something incorrect with them. So they're going to give us their ideas about what they want to achieve and what they also want to avoid. What are the questions that you would ask a grower, or ask a grower to consider and think about? If they came to you, said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing and I want a seed mix," what are the considerations that you want them to go home and consider before that seed mix is selected? Like, how do you put together the recipe for them if you don't know what they want to eat?
One of my first questions is always, how do you plan to seed it, right? Are you broadcast seeding it? Are you drill seeding it, right? That is already going to be sort of, first of all, their answer to that question helps me understand a lot about other things that they're thinking about too. But it's also going to dictate which species we can use, and also the poundage that we need to be putting in.
Okay. Thank you. That is a net new consideration as the front thing. That has not been the first thing that I was thinking of, and that is, from a tactical perspective, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, it could be that that's just because I work with a more diverse group of growers than Joey. Maybe they all, drill seed, and it's a dumb question from his perspective. I don't know, but
no, I mean, I think, you need to know how it's going to be put on for sure. And I mean, and that is a challenge actually with some of this. I mean, obviously broadcasting is easier. It's more available. You do probably get more seeds in spots you don't want, because you're not going to throw it exact and just in, where direct seeding is obviously better, but there's not very many direct seeders, so that makes it more challenge. But I think that's a start, because that will change planting rates a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. We do have, we have an orchard seeder. I think it's 10 or 11 foot Great Plains. It's a drop seed. We call it a no-till drill. It doesn't actually drill. It's a drop seeder and then rolls it. So I think it's considered more of a brilliant style. We have that. We have a vineyard version of the same available to growers. But even though the co-op has these resources, they're still housed and maintained and transported for the growers. And so there's still, it's like, you can't check it out for free like you can a library book. So there's still costs. Right. And depending on how far away somebody is from the equipment, the cost may be greater. So broadcasting is probably going to be a technique that some of our growers use. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's great that, to put that at the front of the conversation. Julia, does broadcasting versus drill or drop seeding, does that affect, like, can you have a seed mix that has wildly different seed sizes? Can you have, legumes with a huge seed and then you've got tiny little mustard seeds in the same mix, or does that change the dynamic as well?
It changes the dynamic, but it's totally doable. It's just about how you treat it. I mean, some of our seed likes to be just a 1/4 inch under the surface, while some of it needs to be, much deeper. So whether you need to roll it afterwards, or are you going to just plant it ahead of a really heavy rain and expect the seed to just kind of melt in? I think the other question I would always ask is, like, what's your soil type, right? So that that's going to be obviously playing into that answer as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, we do mixes with wildly different seed sizes quite often.
Yeah. So there's a fun project that I want to throw at you. We have a grower that has a fairly significant permanent cover already. It's, you could say it's native vegetation or resin vegetation. They haven't, I don't think they've used chemicals on or tilled the property in decades. And so they've got a lot already there. And I believe their goal with tapping into the AMP grant is to introduce more biodiversity, to introduce more intentional biodiversity to their field. But they're not going to till it. They're not going to scrape it clean. They're not going to spray to start with a clean slate. Is that something that's achievable? Is that the type of project that you see is like, okay, this is gonna be fun and interesting? It's like, artistry, on the palette. We're just gonna add more color, add more diversity, or does that create a challenging situation because there's already so much there potentially?
Well, I mean, seed needs to make contact with the soil. So however they go ahead around doing that, whether it's a mow before they seed to open up some canopy
I recommend
space.
mowing for sure.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So like, it's not to say that you can't do that. And then I think, there are some species that can kind of just fit their way into existing plant communities, and there are some that can't. So it would definitely be an interesting challenge that we'd be willing to take on, and a lot of fun to, there are many people who are interested in enhancing biodiversity, and they don't want to nuke the existing vegetation. That's great. We call that like an overseeding mix.
Okay.
So yeah, we could totally do that.
Okay. Great. Earlier in the conversation, we'll wrap this up in a minute, but earlier in the conversation, when you were giving us the slides, you mentioned that there are some, I think, bee forage, insect forage, pollinator mixes specifically for almond orchards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming most growers put those around the perimeter or make them, every X number of rows in their orchard. Is that the type of mix that can become a permanent cover for every row in an orchard? Can somebody go lean into that or take a portion of that and dilute it into whatever their permanent seeding is going to be and basically have, pollinator forage, insect forage on every row?
I think it really depends on how many other requirements you have. Like the whole, I'd sure love to take on the challenge. I think that particular mix would not. It was still pretty relying on annuals for those.
Okay.
But there were some, the clovers in there. A couple of the grasses were perennial. So I think we need to rework the mix, but it's certainly something we could work with the grower on.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, you could have them just over time. Timing of they're trying to get something to more coincide with pollination would probably be different. Some of the perennials are clovers are flowering, things are gonna come out a little later, before they flower. So
yeah.
Right. So that's the thing, right? They're all interested in what's going to be blooming when our orchards are in bloom, and that's mostly going to be annuals.
Okay, so that's mostly annuals. So on that note, that actually brings up an interesting topic, because one of the projects that we've had included a pollinator component along with a kind of a monocropped, perennial grass. And one of the things that we were thinking about is like almonds bloom so early that to have do most pollinator mixes actually benefit directly the almond bloom, or are they really about benefiting just overall biodiversity and beneficial insects for the whole season? Like, because I think there's two, you could have it, you could say it's a pollinator mix, but are you really benefiting the insects, March through June, or are you really focusing on getting other flowers in the orchard opening up in mid to late February?
Yeah.
I think that really depends on what your goal is. A good pollinator mix should be extending the period of bloom in an orchard a little bit on either side, so that there's always forage for the honeybees that you're bringing in, so that they're not stuck, either on the front end or the back end without something to forage on.
Got it. And that is achievable even in California Central Valley. We can get some other flowers in there besides the almond blooms. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, there'll be some annuals, like I said, to do it, probably some annual and perennial combination to do that. Just glancing.
Well, if they're annuals that go to seed, then I could see that being permanent.
Yeah,
but that sounds like that may be a tough goal to meet on all of these. Joey, this last one's for you. So you ranch, I think you said almonds. You've got walnuts.
And walnuts, yes. Uh-huh.
You've been a grower for a couple decades. I sense sometimes that growers are fatigued. They've got program fatigue. They're fatigued from people like me coming at them and saying, you should do this program.
Right.
And you've got both hats. You've got the sales hat and the business development hat of helping them get to what they want, but you also have the grower hat where people are, organizations are coming to growers constantly saying, no, you should do this or you should do that. Like, is there a factor that we should be concerned about? And what are your thoughts on, the best way to communicate this opportunity to change what they're doing, mix it up, do something new, and hopefully in one season put things on the ground that save them some time. But they've got to believe that, they got to feel it, and they've got to want to make that change. So am I right to sense some grower fatigue, and what are your thoughts on how to
totally? And I think
that?
I don't even know if fatigue, it's just that they look at it, and I mean, we don't actually do, we're going to start doing a lot more. We don't do a ton of cover crop stuff. I mean, we have some variegated pasture by it, so we probably get some natural native benefits for pollinators because of that.
I've got grant funding for you.
I know. But I think what it is you look, it's like, we know it's good. And I think even older farmers look, I know it's probably pretty good. There is some good things with it. I mean, like I said, I remember and there's still a few you see that, I want totally clean. I'm growing almonds. I'm not growing any weeds or grasses, and I want it all gone. And, if you took a thermometer in that orchard and you took one that has some, even if it's just weeds and grasses that, in the middle that you kept mowed, the ones with grasses, that's going to be cooler, which is going to help that plant retain the whole environment there, to retain moisture and just be a better growing environment for the trees. So I think that's where guys, at least now, most of them have got to where, okay, I'll leave the centers and I'll mow it, whatever comes up. But they know that if I did a cover crop, it would be better. But it's the management of it, because, we talked with our PCAs when I was at the co-op. It was, how do we do it? They're like, it was a couple things. One was, how are we going to plant it? They don't have a planner to do it, or that was always sometimes the first thing that stopped it. But second is like, well, what about, they got to plant it early enough, and then the benefit, they need to leave it in longer. Well, now they're going in, spraying the orchard, and they got to drive through, these weeds and stuff. They don't really want to do that. Or, there's talk of worrying, raising the frost level, into the trees a little bit more. So all these different things that they talk about, and it was the management of doing it. And I think that's where, organizations like you and us is to show them that it can be done. Those are still fears, but we can get through those with maybe certain timing of mowing and management of it. And some of it's maybe, hey, don't worry about it too much. The tractor can drive through a couple, foot tall plants. It's not going to bog it down. so you can do some things with it, just maybe it's a different way of thinking. And then again, how the benefit of what are you trying to do? And Julie mentioned that a couple of, what are you trying to do? Do you want biomass? Do you want to open up your soil? Do you want pollinators? Do you want, some nitrogen fixation? Kind of where do you want to go first? And obviously the annuals are kind of set up that way. The annual, cover crops we have kind of are earmarked. Here's kind of a, green manure type. Here's, more of a biomass type. Here's some soil health. And we've done that. Perennials can do the same thing. They're maybe not to as big of a degree of you're doing this. They're going to be more well-rounded, and that's good. But I think we can get mixes that can accomplish all of it, allow them to know how to make the most benefit for the orchard for the entire, growing cycle. Be able to still let you manage and work in that orchard, whether it's when you're spraying, you're driving through it, not having all kinds of stuff there. And then when you're harvesting, having enough to be able to do that and still survive. I think it all can be done. It's education, letting people know, doing trials, showing people. I think that's something that's important for us to do more of. And just try it, and this is a perfect way if there's an opportunity to get a grant. It's not all out of the pocket. It's a great way to try. And there's going to be, hey, this worked great. If this farmer and this thing didn't work good on mine because of soil type or the environment or whatever was different, everybody's going to have a little bit different, mix and thing that works.
Yeah.
We're here, we tried it over here. Hey, that didn't work. These are the ones that survived, but they kind of, that's why having a good mix is important, because you're going to find something in there that's going to be right for your environment.
Yeah. So you mentioned the thermal aspect of having deep vegetation. We've heard about that. You mentioned just the amount of biomass. You mentioned cost. Cost is obviously a huge issue. On our AMP grant, we can underwrite the 100% of seed, not delivery and not sales tax. So there is some cost, but 100% of the seed costs for the first 10 acres with a high-end threshold of about $3,700. And then the next 100 acres, we can underwrite with the grant $100 per acre for the next 100 acres. So depending on what seed mix or seed mixes they go with, there's up to about $13,000 in seed funding. Julia, you mentioned, some of the native seeds, some perennials can be very expensive. When somebody comes to you with say $150 an acre budget for a cover mix, do you think, okay, I can get you something really great with that, or do you feel like we're just starting to scratch the surface?
We can totally work with that.
What should people expect?
The idea that right. So I mean, not all native species are hand collected out of the wild. There are many that we have cultivated at our farm for 20 years, and we have a reliable source, and we've cut the cost down. We've really figured out how to produce it. So there are a handful of species that are just my go-to, like it's not going to break the bank. So certainly we can work with that. I think also just showing that it doesn't have to be 100% native mix, right? It can be even just a 10% native mix and make a difference. And that mix I was talking about, the one that we added the Phacelia to, it only changed the cost. I think it was 10 cents more per pound. So certainly happy to work with any budget. The realities are that it doesn't make sense to do a cover crop mix that is so expensive that you wouldn't apply it without a grant. So no, and
we've been thinking like, and it while the first 10 acres, 100% coverage, we've got a really high limit on that, but the next 100 acres, okay, the 10 acres works. I want to do the next 100, and if my next 100, if I'm getting $100 an acre support on that, I'd love for my mix to be, maybe about $100 an acre. And so I think what you're saying is that there's, especially with a mix, there's levers that you can pull to make it work with almost any budget, that's more than zero. And so there's levers that we can pull, and then within a budget, if there's a little bit extra, like you said, 10 cents or so. I'm not sure if that was per acre, per pound, but
Per pound.
if there's if there's a 10 cent per pound increase, for a few pennies per pound, you can introduce a little more biodiversity. You can introduce another species that's going to spice it up and make it more interesting. Put some root biodiversity in there, some flowering biodiversity. And so there's room to make it interesting. So This is great. I'm very excited the fact that we've got this resource for growers. I'm really happy that we're going to be able to work together. You are the two of you, I'm in Sacramento. Joey, I think you're down just a little south of me. Julia, you're a little north of me. Like you all serve California, very thoroughly between, Hedgerow and Pacific Coast Seed. And I'm excited to be able to bring some of our producers and the participants in the grant to you, to see what you all want to throw at them as ideas, and we'll get some seed on the ground this fall with you. So I appreciate you being a resource in what you guys are doing.
Great. Well, we're excited to be a resource, and please don't hesitate to get in touch or put your growers in touch with us if they want to ask us any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll wrap it up. We'll wrap it up with this, and we'll have this shared out through some of our channels and available, so that folks that want to learn more about Hedgerow Farms, Pacific Coast Seed, Native Seed Group, and perennials in practice, using perennials and permanent cover in practice, they can tap into this resource at any time. So thanks so much. All right, we'll see you later. I'm going to log off.